Augustine's Confessions, Book 1. Early Years. You are great, Lord God, and highly to be praised. Great is your power, and your wisdom is immeasurable. Man, a little piece of your creation, desires to praise you. A human being bearing his mortality with him, carrying with him the witness of his sin and the witness that you resist the proud. Nevertheless, to praise you is the desire of man, a little piece of your creation. You stir men to take pleasure in praising you because you have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. Grant me, Lord, to know and understand which comes first, to call upon you or to praise you, and whether knowing you precedes calling upon you. But who calls upon you when he does not know you? For an ignorant person might call upon someone instead of the right one. But surely you may be called upon in prayer, that you may be known. Yet how shall they call upon him in whom they've not believed? And how shall they believe without a preacher? They will praise the Lord who seek for him. In seeking him, they find him, and in finding him, they'll praise him. Lord, I would seek you, calling upon you, and calling upon you is an act of believing in you. You have been preached to us. My faith, Lord, calls upon you. It is your gift to me. You breathed it into me by the humanity of your Son, by the ministry of your preacher. How shall I call upon my God and Lord? Surely when I call on him, I'm calling on him to come into me. But what place is there in me where my God can enter into me? God made heaven and earth. Where may he come to me? Lord my God, is there any room in me which can contain you? Can heaven and earth, which you have made and which you have made me, contain you? Without you, whatever exists would not exist. Then can what exists contain you? I also have being. So why do I request you to come to me when, unless you were within me, I would have no being at all? I am not now possessed by Hades, yet even there are you. For even if I were to go down to Hades, you would be present. Accordingly, my God, I would have no being. I would not have any existence unless you were in me. Or rather, I would have no being if I were not in you, of whom are all things, through whom are all things, in whom are all things. Even so, Lord, even so. How can I call on you to come if I'm already in you? Or where can you come from so as to be in me? Can I move outside heaven and earth so that my God may come to me from there? For God has said, I fill heaven and earth. Do heaven and earth contain you because you filled them? Or do you fill them and overflow them because they do not contain you? Where do you put the overflow of yourself after heaven and earth are filled? Or have you, who contain all things, no need to be contained by anything, because what you will, you fill by containing it? We cannot think you are given coherence by vessels full of you, because even if they were to be broken, you would not be split. When you are poured out upon us, you are not wasted on the ground, You raise us upright. You are not scattered, but reassemble us. And filling all things, you fill them all with the whole of yourself. Is it that because all things cannot contain the whole of you, they contain part of you, and that all things contain the same part of you simultaneously? Or does each part contain a different part of you? The larger containing the greater parts, the lesser the smaller. Does that imply that there's some part of you which is greater, another part smaller? Or is the whole of you everywhere, yet without anything that contains you entire? Who then are you, my God? What, I ask, but God, who is Lord? For who is the Lord but the Lord? Or who is God but our God? Most high, utterly good, utterly powerful, most omnipotent, most merciful, most just, deeply hidden, yet most intimately present, perfection of both beauty and strength, stable and incomprehensible, immutable and yet changing all things, never new, never old, making everything new and leading the proud to be old without their knowledge. Always active, always in repose, gathering to yourself but not in need, supporting and filling and protecting, creating and nurturing and bringing to maturity, searching even though to you nothing is lacking. You love without burning. You are jealous in a way that is free of anxiety. You repent without the pain of regret. You are wrathful and remain tranquil. You will a change without any change in your design. You recover what you find, yet have never lost. Never in any need you rejoice in your gains. You are never avaricious, yet you require interest. We pay you more than you require so as to make you our debtor. Yet who has anything which does not belong to you? You pay off debts, though owing nothing to anyone, and you cancel debts and incur no loss. But in these words, what have I said, my God, my life, my holy sweetness? What has anyone achieved in words when he speaks about you? Yet, woe to those who are silent about you, because, though loquacious with verbosity, they have nothing to say. Who will enable me to find rest in you? Who will grant me that you come to my heart and intoxicate it, so that I forget my evils and embrace my one and only good yourself? What are you to me? Have mercy so that I may find words. What am I to you that you command me to love you? And that if I fail to love you, you are angry with me and threaten me with vast miseries? If I do not love you, is that but a little misery? What a wretch I am! In your mercies, Lord God, tell me what you are to me. Say to my soul, I am your salvation. Speak to me so that I may hear. See, the ears of my heart are before you, Lord. Open them and say to my soul, I am your salvation. After that utterance, I will run and lay hold on you. Do not hide your face from me, lest I die. Let me die so that I may see it. The house of my soul is too small for you to come to it. May it be enlarged by you. It is in ruins, restore it. In your eyes, it has offensive features. I admit it, I know it, but who will clean it up? Or to whom shall I cry other than you? Cleanse me from my secret faults, Lord, and spare your servant from sins to which I am tempted by others. I believe, and therefore I speak. Lord, you know, have I not openly accused myself of my faults, my God? And you forgave me the iniquity of my heart. I do not contend with you in a court of law, for you are the truth. I do not deceive myself, lest my iniquity lie to itself. Therefore, I do not contend with you like a litigant, because if you take note of iniquities, Lord, who shall stand? Nevertheless, allow me to speak before your mercy, though I am but dust and ashes. Allow me to speak, for I am addressing your mercy, not a man who would laugh at me. Perhaps even you deride me, but you will turn and have mercy on me. What, Lord, do I wish to say except that I do not know whence I came to be in this mortal life, or as I may call it, this living death? I do not know where I came from, but the consolations of your mercies upheld me, as I have heard from the parents of my flesh, him from whom and her in whom you formed me in time. For I do not remember. So I was welcomed by the consolations of human milk, but it was not my mother or my nurses who made any decision to fill their breasts, but you who through them gave me infant food, in accordance with your ordinance and the riches which are distributed deep in the natural order. You also granted me not to wish for more than you were giving, and to my nurses the desire to give me what you gave them. For by an impulse which you control, their instinctive wish was to give me the milk which they had in abundance from you. For the good which came to me from them was a good for them. Yet it was not from them, but through them. Indeed, all good things come from you, O God, and from my God is all my salvation. I became aware of this only later when you cried aloud to me through the gifts which you bestow both inwardly in mind and outwardly in body. For at that time I knew nothing more than how to suck and to be quietened by bodily delights and to weep when I was physically uncomfortable. Afterwards, I began to smile, first in my sleep, then when awake. That at least is what I was told, and I believed it, since that is what we see other infants doing. I do not actually remember what I then did. Little by little, I began to be aware where I was and wanted to manifest my wishes to those who could fulfill them, as I could not. For my desires were internal, adults were external to me, and had no means of entering into my soul. So I threw my limbs about and uttered sounds, signs resembling my wishes, the small number of signs of which I was capable, but such signs as lay in my power to use, for there was no real resemblance. When I did not get my way, either because I was not understood or lest it be harmful to me, I used to be indignant with my seniors for their disobedience, and with free people who were not slaves to my interests. And I would revenge myself upon them by weeping. That this is the way of infants I have learned from them, from those I have been able to watch. That is what I was like myself. And although they have not been aware of it, they've taught me more than my nurses, with all their knowledge of how I behave. My infancy is long dead, and I am alive. But you, Lord, live, and in you nothing dies. You are before the beginning of the ages, and prior to everything that can be said to be before. You are God and Lord of all you have created. In you are the constant causes of inconstant things. All mutable things have in you their immutable origins. In you, all irrational and temporal things have the everlasting causes of their life. Tell me, God, tell your suppliant in mercy to your poor wretch. Tell me whether there was some period of my life, now dead and gone, which preceded my infancy, Or is this period that which I spent in my mother's womb? On that matter, also, I have learned something, and I myself have seen pregnant women. What was going on before that, my sweetness, my God? Was I anywhere or any sort of person? I have no one able to tell me that, neither my father, nor my mother, nor the experience of others, nor my own memory. But you may smile at me for putting these questions. Your command that I praise you and confess you may be limited to that which I know. So I acknowledge you, Lord of heaven and earth, articulating my praise to you for my beginnings and my infancy, which I do not recall. You also have given mankind the capacity to understand oneself by analogy with others, and to believe much about oneself on the authority of weak women. Even at that time, I had existence and life, and already at the last stage of my infant speechlessness, I was searching out signs by which I made my thoughts known to others. Where can a living being, such as an infant, come from if not from you, God? Or can anyone become the cause of his own making? Or is there any channel through which being and life can be drawn into us other than what you make us? In you, it is not one thing to be and another to live. The supreme degree of being and the supreme degree of life are one and the same thing. You are being in a supreme degree and are immutable. In you, the present day has no ending, and yet in you, it has its end. All these things have their being in you. They would have no way of passing away unless you set a limit to them, because your years do not fail. Your years are one today. How many of our days and days of our fathers have passed during your today, and have derived from it the measure and condition of their existence? And others too will pass away, and from the same source derive the condition of their existence. But you are the same, and all tomorrow and hereafter, and indeed all yesterday and further back. You will make it today. You have made it today. If anyone finds your simultaneity beyond his understanding, it is not for me to explain it. Let him be content to say, "What is this?" So too, let him rejoice and delight in finding you, who are beyond discovery, rather than fail to find you by supposing you to be discoverable. Hear me, God. Alas for the sins of humanity. Man it is who says this, and you have pity on him, because you made him and did not make sin in him. Who reminds me of the sin of my infancy? For none is pure from sin before you, not even an infant of one day upon the earth. Who reminds me? Any tiny child now, for I see in that child what I do not remember in myself. What sin did I then have? Was it wrong that in tears I greedily opened my mouth to suck the breasts? If I were to do that now, gasping to eat food appropriate to my present age, I would be laughed at and very properly rebuked. At the time of my infancy, I must have acted reprehensibly, but since I could not understand the person who admonished me, neither custom nor reason allowed me to be reprehended. As we grow up, we eliminate and set aside such ways. But I have never seen anyone knowingly set aside what is good when purging something of faults. Yet for an infant of that age, could it be reckoned good to use tears in trying to obtain what it would have been harmful to get? To be vehemently indignant at the refusals of free and older people and of parents or many other people of good sense who would not yield to my whims and to attempt to strike them and to do as much injury as possible? There is never an obligation to be obedient to orders which it would be pernicious to obey. So the feebleness of infant limbs is innocent, not the infant's mind. I have personally watched and studied a jealous baby. He could not yet speak, and pale with jealousy and bitterness, glared at his brother sharing his mother's milk. Who is unaware of this fact of experience? Mothers and nurses claim to charm it away by their own private remedies. But it can hardly be innocence when the source of milk is flowing richly and abundantly, not to endure a share going to one's blood brother, who's in profound need, dependent for life exclusively on that one food. But people smilingly tolerate this behavior, not because it is nothing or only a trivial matter, but because with coming of age it will pass away. You can prove this to be the case from the fact that the same behavior cannot be borne without irritation when encountered in someone of more mature years. You, Lord my God, are the giver of life and a body to a baby. As we see, you have endowed it with senses, you have coordinated the limbs, you've adorned it with a beautiful form, and for the coherence and preservation of the whole, you have implanted all the instincts of a living being. You therefore command me to praise you for that, and to confess to you and to sing to your name, Most High God. You are omnipotent and good, even if that were all you'd made. No one else could do that except you, the one from whom every kind of being is derived. The supreme beauty you give distinct form to all things, and by your law impose order on everything. This period of my life, Lord, I do not remember having lived, but I have believed what others have told me, and have assumed how I behaved from observing other infants. Despite the high probability of this assumption, I do not wish to reckon this as part of the life that I live in this world, for it is lost in the darkness of my forgetfulness and is on the same level as the life I lived in my mother's womb. If I was conceived in iniquity, and in sins my mother nourished me in her womb, I ask you, my God, I ask, Lord, where and when your servant was innocent. But of that time I say nothing more. I feel no sense of responsibility, now for a time of which I recall not a single trace. On my path to the present, I emerged from infancy to boyhood. Or rather, boyhood came upon me and succeeded infancy. Infancy did not depart, for it has nowhere to go. Yet I was no longer a baby incapable of speech, but already a boy with power to talk. This I remember, but how I learned to talk, I discovered only later. It was not that grown up people instructed me by presenting me with words in a certain order by formal teaching, as later I was to learn the letters of the alphabet. I myself acquired this power of speech with the intelligence which you gave me, my God, by groans and various sounds and various movements of parts of my body. I would endeavor to express the intentions of my heart, to persuade people to bow to my will. But I had not the power to express all that. I wanted, nor could I make my wishes and various movement. Ah, on my path to the present, I emerged from infancy to boyhood, or rather, boyhood came upon me and succeeded infancy. Infancy did not depart, for it has nowhere to go. Yet I was no longer a baby incapable of speech, but already a boy with power to talk. This I remember, but how I learned to talk I discovered only later. It was not that grown up people instructed me by presenting me with words in a certain order. By formal teaching, as later I was to learn the alphabet. I myself acquired this power of speech with the intelligence which you gave me. By groans and various sounds and various movements of parts of my body, I would endeavor to express the intentions of my heart, to persuade people to bow to my will. But I had not the power to express all that I wanted, nor could I make my wishes understood by everybody. My grasp made use of memory when people give a name to an object, and when I follow the sound, they move their body towards that object. I would see and retain the fact that that object received from them the sound which they pronounced when they intended to draw attention to it. Moreover, their intention was evident from the gestures, which are, as it were, the natural vocabulary of all races. And we are made with the face and the inclination of the eyes and the movements of other parts of the body, and by the tone of voice, which indicates whether the mind's inward sentiments are to seek and possess or to reject and avoid. Accordingly, I gradually gathered the meaning of words, occurring in their places in different sentences and frequently heard. And already I learnt to articulate my wishes by training my mouth to use these signs. In this way, I communicated the signs of my wishes to those around me and entered more deeply into the stormy society of human life. I was dependent on the authority of my parents and the direction of adult people. Oh God, my God, what miseries I experienced. At this stage of my life, and what delusions when in my boyhood it was set before me as my moral duty in life to obey those who admonished me with the purpose that I should succeed in this world and should excel in the arts of using my tongue to gain access to human honors and to acquire deceitful riches. I was next sent to school to learn to read and write. Poor wretch, I did not understand for what such knowledge is useful. Yet if ever I was indolent in learning, I was beaten. This method was approved by adults. Many people living long before me had instructed the laborious courses which we were compelled to follow by an increase of the toil and sorrow of Adam's children. We found, however, Lord, people who pray to you, and from them we learnt to think of you in our limited way as some large being with the power, even when not present to our senses, of hearing us and helping us. As a boy, I began to pray to you, my help and my refuge. And for my prayer to you, I broke the bonds of my tongue. Though I was only a small child, there was great feeling when I pleaded with you that I might not be caned at school. When you did not hear me, which was so as not to give me to foolishness, adult people, including even my parents, who wished no evil to come upon me, used to laugh at my stripes, which were at that time a great and painful evil to me. Lord, is there anyone, any mind so great, united to you by a strong love? Is there, I say, anyone, as with the character produced by a certain stolidity, is there a man who is so devotedly united to you with mighty affection that he holds of small account racks and hooks and various torments of this brutal nature, which in all countries people with great terror pray that they may escape, and yet loves those who are utterly terrified of them? Is this comparable to the way our parents laughed at the torments which our teachers inflicted on us as boys? We at least were no less scared and prayed no less passionately to escape them. Yet we were at fault in paying less attention than was required of us to writing or reading or using our minds about our books. Not, Lord, that there was a deficiency in memory or intelligence. It was your will to endow us sufficiently with a level appropriate to our age. But we loved to play, and punishments were imposed on us by those who were engaged in adult games. For the amusement of adults is called business. But when boys play such games, they are punished by adults, and no one feels sorry either for the children or for the adults, or indeed for both of them. Perhaps some refined arbiter of things might approve of my being beaten. As a boy, I played ball games, and that play slowed down the speed at which I learnt letters, with which, as an adult, I might play a less creditable game. The schoolmaster who caned me, was behaving no better than I, when after being refuted by a fellow teacher in some pedantic question, he was more tormented by jealousy and envy than I when my opponent overcame me in a ball game. Yet I was at fault, Lord God, orderer and creator of all things in nature, but of sinners only the orderer. Lord my God, I sinned by not doing as I was told by my parents and my teachers. For later I was able to make good use of letters, whatever might be the intention of my adult guardians in wanting me to learn them. I was disobedient not because I had chosen higher things, but from love of sport. In competitive games, I loved the pride of winning. I liked to tickle my ears with false stories, which further titillated my desires. The same curiosity mountingly increased my appetite for public shows. Public shows are the games of adults. Those who give them are persons held in such high dignity that almost everyone wishes this honor to come to their children. But they happily allow them to be flogged, if such shows hinder the study which will bring them, they hope, to the position of giving such shows. Look with mercy on these follies, Lord, and deliver us, who now call upon you. Deliver also those who do not as yet pray, that they may call upon you, and you may set them free. When I was still a boy, I had heard about eternal life, promised to us through the humility of our Lord God, coming down to our pride, and I was already signed with the sign of the cross and seasoned with salt from the time I came from my mother's womb. She greatly put her trust in you. You saw, Lord, how one day when I was still a small boy, pressure on the chest suddenly made me hot with fever and almost at death's door. You saw, my God, because you were already my guardian. With what fervor of mind and with what faith I then begged for the baptism of your Christ, my God and Lord. urging it on the devotion of my mother and of the mother of us all, your church. My physical mother was distraught. With a pure heart and faith in you, she even more lovingly travailed in labor for my eternal salvation. She hastily made arrangements for me to be initiated and washed in the sacraments of salvation, confessing you, Lord Jesus, for the remission of sins. But suddenly I recovered. My cleansing was deferred on the assumption that if I lived, I would be sure to soil myself. And after that solemn washing, the guilt would be greater and more dangerous if I then defiled myself with sins. So I was already a believer, as were my mother and the entire household, except for my father alone. Though he had not yet come to faith, he did not obstruct my right to follow my mother's devotion, so as to prevent me believing in Christ. She anxiously labored to convince me that you, my God, were my father rather than he, and in this endeavor you helped her to gain victory over her husband. His moral superior, she rendered obedient service to him, for in this matter she was being obedient to your authority. I beg of you, my God, I long to know, if it is your will, what was your purpose when at that time it was decided to defer my baptism? Was it for my good that the restraints on sinning were, as it were, relaxed? Or were they not in fact relaxed? Even now, gossip speaking about one or another person can be heard on all sides, saying in our ears, let him be, let him do it. He is not yet baptized. Yet in regard to bodily health, we do not say, let him inflict more wounds on himself, for he's not yet cured. How much better for me if I had been quickly healed, and if thanks to the diligent care of my family and my own decisions, action had been taken by which I received the health of my soul and was kept safe under the protection which you would have given me. Certainly much better. But beyond boyhood, many great waves of temptations were seen to be threatening. My mother was already well aware of that, and her plan was to commit to the waves the clay out of which I would later be shaped, rather than the actual image itself. Nevertheless, even during boyhood, when there was less reason to fear than during adolescence, I had no love for reading books and hated being forced to study them. Yet pressure was put on me and was good for me. It was not of my own inclination that I did well, for I learned nothing unless I was compelled. No one is doing right if he is acting against his will, even when what he is doing is good. Those who put compulsion on me were not doing right either. The good was done to me by you, my God. They gave no consideration to the use that I might make of the things they forced me to learn. The objective they had in view was merely to satisfy the appetite for wealth and for glory. Though the appetite is insatiable, the wealth is in reality destitution of spirit, and the glory something to be ashamed of. But you, by whom the hairs of our head are numbered, used the error of all who pressed me to learn to turn out to my advantage. And my reluctance to learn you used for a punishment which I well deserved. So tiny a child, so great a sinner. So by making use of those who are failing to do anything morally right, you did good to me. And for me and my sin, you exacted a just retribution. For you have imposed order. And so it is that the punishment of every disordered mind is its own disorder. Even now, I have not yet discovered the reasons why I hated Greek literature when I was being taught it as a small boy. Latin I deeply loved, not at the stage of my primary teachers, but at the secondary level, taught by the teachers of literature called grammarians. The initial elements where one learns the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic I felt to be no less a burden and an infliction than the entire series of Greek classes. The root of this aversion must simply have been sin and the vanity of life, by which I was mere flesh and wind going on its way and not returning. Of course, those first elements of the language were better because more fundamental. On that foundation, I came to acquire the faculty which I had and still possess of being able to read whatever I find written and to write myself whatever I wish. This was better than the poetry I was later forced to learn about the wanderings of some legendary fellow named Aeneas, forgetful of my own wanderings, and to weep over the death of a Dido who took her own life from love. In reading this, oh my God, my life, I myself was dying by my alienation from you, and my miserable condition in that respect brought no tear to my eyes. What is more pitiable than a wretch without pity for himself, who weeps over the death of Dido, dying for love of Aeneas, but not weeping over himself, dying for his lack of love for you, my God, light of my heart, bread of the inner mouth of my soul, the power which begets life in my mind and in the innermost recesses of my thinking. I had no love for you, and committed fornication against you. And in my fornications, I heard all around me the cries, well done, well done. For the friendship of this world is fornication against you. Well done is what they say to shame a man who does not go along with them. Over this, I wept not a tear. I wept over Dido, who died in pursuing her ultimate end with a sword. I abandoned you to pursue the lowest thing of your creation. I was dust going to dust. Had I been forbidden to read this story, I would have been sad. That I could not read what would make me sad. Such madness is considered a higher and more fruitful literary education than being taught to read and write. But now, may my God cry out in my soul, and may your truth tell me, it is not so. It is not so. The best education you received was the primary. Obviously, I much prefer to forget the wanderings of Aeneas and all that stuff than to write and read. It is true, veils hang at the entrances to the schools of literature, but they do not signify the prestige of elite teaching so much as the covering up of air. Let no critic shout against me. I'm not afraid of them now. While I confess to you the longing of my soul, my God, and when I accept rebuke for my evil ways and wish to love your good ways, let there be no abuse of me from people who sell or buy a literary education. If I put the question to them whether the poet's story is true that Aeneas once came to Carthage, the uneducated will reply that they do not know, while the educated will say it is false. But if I ask with what letters Aeneas's name is spelled, all who've learned to read will reply correctly in accordance with the argument and convention by which human beings have determined the value of these signs. Similarly, if I ask which would cause the greater inconvenience to someone's life, to forget how to read and write, or to forget these fabulous poems, who does not see what answer he would give, unless he has totally lost his senses? So it was a sin in me as a boy when I gave pride of place in my affection to those empty fables rather than to more useful studies, or rather, when I hated the one and loved the other. But to me it was a hateful chant to recite 1 and 1 is 2, and 2 and 2 are 4. Delightful was the vain spectacle of the wooden horse full of armed soldiers, and the burning of Troy, and the very ghosts of Creusa. Why then did I hate Greek, which has similar songs to sing? Homer was skilled at weaving such stories, and with sheer delight mixed vanity. Yet to me as a boy he was repellent.
I can well believe that Greek boys feel the same way about Virgil when they're forced to learn him the way that I learned Homer. The difficulty lies there. The difficulty of learning a foreign language at all. It sprinkles gall, as it were, over all the charms of the stories the Greeks tell. I did not know any of the words, and violent pressure on me to learn them was imposed by means of fearful and cruel punishment. At one time in my infancy, I also knew no Latin, and yet by listening, I learnt it with no fear or pain at all, from my nurses caressing me, from people laughing over jokes, and from those who played games and were enjoying them. I learnt Latin without the threat of punishment from anyone forcing me to learn it. My own heart constrained me to bring its concepts to birth, which I could not have done unless I'd learned some words, not from formal teaching, but by listening to people talking. And they, in turn, were the audience for my thoughts. This experience sufficiently illuminates the truth that free curiosity has greater power to stimulate learning than rigorous coercion. Nevertheless, the free ranging flux of curiosity is channeled by discipline under your laws, God. By your laws, we are disciplined from the canes of schoolmasters to the ordeals of martyrs. Your laws have the power to temper bitter experiences in a constructive way, recalling us to ourselves, recalling us to yourself from the pestilential life of easy comforts which have taken us away from you. Lord, hear my prayer that my soul may not collapse under your discipline and may not suffer exhaustion in confessing to you your mercies, by which you have delivered me from all my evil ways. Bring to me a sweetness surpassing all the seductive delights which I pursued. Enable me to love you with all my strength, that I may clasp your hand with all my heart. Deliver me from all temptation to the end. You, Lord, are my King and my God. Turn to your service whatever may be of use in what I learnt in boyhood. May I dedicate to your service my power to speak and write and read and count. For when I learnt vanities, you imposed discipline on me and have forgiven me the sin of desiring pleasure from those vanities. For in them I learnt many useful words, but these words can also be learnt through things that are not vain. And that is a safe way along which children should walk. Woe to you, torrent of human custom! Who can stand against you? When will you run dry? How long will your flowing current carry the sons of Eve into the great and fearful ocean which can be crossed with difficulty only by those who have embarked on the wood of the cross? Have I not read in you of Jupiter, at once both thunderer and adulterer? Of course, the two activities cannot be combined. But he was so described as to give an example of real adultery defended by the authority of a fictitious thunderclap acting as a go-between. What master of oratory can hear with equanimity a person of his own profession saying out loud, Homer invented these fictions and attributed human power to the gods. I wish he had attributed divine powers to us. It would be truer to say that Homer indeed invented these fictions, but he attributed divine sanction to vicious acts, which had the result that immorality was no longer counted immorality, and anyone who so acted would seem to follow the example not of abandoned men, but of the gods in heaven. Yet, you infernal river, the sons of men are thrown into you, and fees are paid for them to learn these things. It is a matter of great public concern. When a speech is made in the forum in full view of the laws decreeing that teachers' salaries be paid from public funds in addition to the fees paid by pupils. The river of customs strikes the rocks and roars. This is why words are learnt. This is why one has to acquire the eloquence wholly necessary for carrying conviction in one's cause and for developing one's thoughts. It is as if we would not know words such as golden shower and bosom and deceit and temples of heaven and other phrases occurring in the passage in question had not Terence brought onto the stage a worthless young man citing Jupiter as a model for his own fornication. He's looking up at a mural painting. There was this picture representing how Jupiter, they say, sent a shower of gold into Danae's lap and deceived a woman. Notice how he encourages himself to lust as if enjoying celestial authority. But what a god, he says. He strikes the temple of heaven with his immense sound. And am I, poor little fellow, not to do the same as he? Yes, indeed, I've done it with pleasure. There is no force at all in the argument that these words are more easily learnt through this obscene text. The words actually encourage a more confident committing of a disgraceful action. I bring no charge against the words, which are like exquisite and precious vessels, but the wine of air is poured into them for us by drunken teachers. If we failed to drink, we were caned and could not appeal to any sober judge. Yet, my God, before whose sight I now recall this without the memory disturbing me. I learned this text with pleasure, and I took delight in it. Wretch that I was. For this reason, I was said to be a boy of high promise. Let me, my God, say something also about the intelligence which was your gift to me, and the ways in which I wasted it on follies. A task was set me which caused me deep psychological anxiety. The reward was praise, but I feared shame and blows if I did badly. I was to recite the speech of Juno in her anger and grief, that she could not keep the Trojan king out of Italy. I'd understood that Juno never said this, but we were compelled to follow in our wanderings the path set by poetic fictions, and to express in plain prose the sense which the poet had put in verse. The speaker who received highest praise was the one who had regard to the dignity of the imaginary characters, who most effectively expressed feelings of anger and sorrow, and who clothed these thoughts in appropriate language. What could all this matter to me, true life, my God? What importance could it have for me that my recitation was acclaimed beyond many other readers of my age group? Was not the whole exercise mere smoke and wind? Was there no other subject on which my talent and tongue might be exercised? Your praises, Lord, your praises expressed through your scriptures would have upheld the tender vine of my heart, and it would not have been snatched away by empty trifles to become a shameful prey for the birds. There is more than one way of offering sacrifice to the fallen angels. When one considers the men proposed to me as models for my imitation, it is no wonder that in this way I was swept along by vanities and traveled right away from you, my God. They would be covered in embarrassment if, in describing their own actions in which they had not behaved badly, they were caught using a barbarism or a solecism in speech. But if they described their lusts in a rich vocabulary of well constructed prose, with a copious and ornate style, they received praise and congratulated themselves. Lord, you're long suffering and very patient and true. You see this and you keep silence. But will you always keep silence? Even at this moment, you are delivering from this terrifying abyss the soul who seeks for you and thirsts for your delights, whose heart tells you, I've sought your face. Your face, Lord, I will seek. To be far from your face is to be in the darkness of passion. One does not go far away from you or return to you by walking or by any movement through space. The younger son of your gospel did not look for horses or carriages or ships. He did not fly on any visible wing, nor did he travel along the way by moving his legs when he went to live in a far country and prodigally dissipated what you, his gentle father, had given him on setting out, showing yourself even gentler on his return as a bankrupt. To live there in lustful passion is to live in darkness and to be far from your face. Look, Lord God, look with patience, as you always do. See the exact care with which the sons of men observe the conventions of letters and syllables received from those who so talked before them. Yet they neglect the eternal contracts of lasting salvation received from you. This has gone to such lengths that if someone who is educated in or is a teacher of the old conventional sounds pronounces the word human contrary to the school teaching without pronouncing the initial aspirate, he is socially censored more than if, contrary to your precepts, he were to hate a human being, his fellow man. It is as if he felt an enemy to be more destructive than his own hatred, which has soured the relationship, or as if a man were thought to cause greater damage to someone else by persecuting him than he causes to himself by cherishing hostile attitudes. Certainly, the knowledge of letters is not as deep seated in the consciousness as the imprint of the moral conscience that he is doing to another what he would not wish done to himself. How mysterious you are, God, dwelling on high in silence. You alone are great. By your inexhaustible law, you assign penal blindnesses to illicit desires. A man enjoying a reputation for eloquence takes his position before a human judge, with a crowd of men standing round, and attacks his opponent with ferocious animosity. He's extremely vigilant in precautions against some error in language, but is indifferent to the possibility that the emotional force of his mind may bring about a man's execution. These were the moral conventions of the world where I, as a wretched boy, lay on the threshold. This was the arena in which I was to wrestle. I was more afraid of committing a barbarism than, if I did commit one, on my guard against feeling envy towards those who did not. I declare and confess this to you, my God. These were the qualities for which I was praised by people whose approval was at that time my criterion of good life. I did not see the whirlpool of shame into which I was cast out of your sight. For in those endeavors I was the lowest of the low, shocking even the worldly set by the innumerable lies with which I decided the slave who took me to school, which I deceived the slave who took me to school, and my teachers and parents, because of my love of games, my passion for frivolous spectacles, and my restless urge to imitate comic scenes. I also used to steal from my parents' cellar and to pocket food from their table, either to satisfy the demands of gluttony or to have something to give to boys who, of course, loved playing a game as much as I. And who would sell me their playthings in return? Even in this game, I was overcome by a vain desire to win and was often guilty of cheating. Any breach of the rules I would not tolerate, and if I detected it, would fiercely denounce it, though it was exactly what I was doing to others. And if I was caught and denounced, I used to prefer to let my rage have free rein rather than to give ground. Is that childish innocence? It is not, Lord, is it? I pray you, my God, behavior does not change when one leaves behind domestic guardians and schoolmasters, nuts and balls and sparrows, to be succeeded by prefects and kings, gold, estates, and slaves, as one advances to later stages in life. Likewise, canes are replaced by harsher punishments. So you, our king, have taken the small physical size of a child as a symbol of humility. That was what you approved when you said, "Of such is the kingdom of heaven." Yet, Lord, I must give thanks to you, the most excellent and supremely good creator and governor of the universe, my God, even though by your will I was merely a child. For at that time I existed, I lived and thought and took care for my self preservation, a mark of your profound latent unity, whence I derived my being. An inward instinct told me to take care of the integrity of my senses, and even in my little thoughts about little matters, I took delight in the truth. I hated to be deceived. I developed a good memory. I acquired the armory of being skilled with words. Friendship softened me. I avoided pain, despondency, ignorance. And such a person, what was not worthy of admiration and praise? But every one of these qualities are gifts of my God. I did not give them to myself. They are good qualities, and their totality is myself. Therefore, he who made me is good, and he is my good, and I exalt him for all the good things that I was, even as a boy. My sin consisted in this, that I sought pleasure, sublimity, and truth not in God, but in his creatures, in myself and other created beings. So it was that I plunged into miseries, confusions, and errors. My God, I give thanks to you, my source of sweet delight, in my glory and my confidence. I thank you for your gifts. Keep them for me, for in this way you will keep me. The talents you have given will increase and be perfected, and I will be with you since it was your gift to me that I exist.
St. Augustine's Confessions, Book 2. Adolescence. I intend to remind myself of my past foulness and carnal corruptions, not because I love them, but so that I may love you, my God. It is from love of your love that I make the act of recollection. The recalling of my wicked ways is bitter in my memory, but I do it so that you may be sweet to me. A sweetness touched by no deception, a sweetness serene and content. You gathered me together from the state of disintegration in which I had been fruitlessly divided. I turned from unity in you to be lost in multiplicity. At one time in adolescence, I was burning to find satisfaction in hellish pleasures. I ran wild in the shadowy jungle of erotic adventures, my beauty wasted away. And in your sight, I became putrid. By pleasing myself and by being ambitious to win human approval. The single desire that dominated my search for delight was simply to love and to be loved. But no restraint was imposed by the exchange of mind with mind, which marks the brightly lit pathway of friendship. Clouds of muddy carnal concupiscence filled the air. The bubbling impulses of puberty befogged and obscured my heart, so that I could not see the difference between love's serenity and lust's darkness. Confusion of the two things boiled within me, seized hold of my youthful weakness, sweeping me through the precipitous rocks of desire to submerge me in a whirlpool of vice. Your wrath was heavy upon me. I was unaware of it. I had become deafened by the clanking chain of my mortal condition, the penalty of my pride. I traveled very far from you, and you did not stop me. I was tossed about and split, scattered and boiled, dry in my fornications, and you were silent. How slow I was to find my joy. At that time, you said nothing, and I traveled much further away from you into more and more sterile things, productive of unhappiness, proud in my self pity, incapable of rest in my exhaustion. If only someone could have imposed restraint on my disorder, that would have transformed to good purpose the fleeting experiences of beauty in these lowest of things, and fixed limits to indulgence in their charms. Then the stormy waves of my youth would have finally broken on the shore of marriage. Even so, I could not have been wholly content to confine sexual union to acts intended to procreate children, as your law prescribes. For you shape the propagation of our mortal race, Lord, imposing your gentle hand to soften the brambles which were excluded from your paradise. Your omnipotence is never far from us, even when we are far from you. Alternatively, I had ought to have paid more vigilant heed to the voice from your clouds. Nevertheless, those who are married shall have trouble in the flesh, and I would spare you. And it is good for a man not to touch a woman. And he who has no wife thinks on the things of God, how he can please God. But he who is joined in marriage thinks on the affairs of the world, how can he please his wife? Had I paid careful attention to these sayings and become a eunuch for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, I would have been happier finding fulfillment in your embraces. But I in my misery seethed and followed the driving force of my impulses, abandoning you. I exceeded all the bounds set by your law and did not escape your chastisement. Indeed, no mortal can do so. For you are always with me, mercifully punishing me, touching with a bitter taste all my illicit pleasures. Your intention was that I should seek delights unspoilt by disgust, and that in my quest where I could achieve this, I should discover it to be in nothing except you, Lord, nothing but you. You fashion pain to be a lesson. You strike to heal. You bring death upon us so that we should not die apart from you. Where was I in the 16th year of the age of my flesh? Far away in exile from the pleasures of your house. Sensual folly assumed domination over me, and I gave myself totally to it in acts allowed by shameful humanity, but under your laws illicit. My family did not try to extricate me from my headlong course by means of marriage. The only concern was that I should learn to speak as effectively as possible and carry conviction by my oratory. During my 16th year, there was an interruption in my studies. I was recalled from Adoros, the nearby town where I had first lived away from home, to learn literature and oratory. During that time, funds were gathered in preparation for a more distant absence at Carthage, for which my father had more enthusiasm than cash, since he was a citizen of Thagus with very modest resources. To whom do I tell these things? Not to you, my God, but before you, I declare this to my race, the human race, though only a tiny part can light on this composition of mine. And why do I include this episode? It is that I and any of my readers may reflect on the great depth from which we have to cry to you. Nothing is nearer to your ears than a confessing heart and a life grounded in faith. At that time, everybody was full of praise for my father because he spent money on his son beyond the means of his estate, when that was necessary to finance an education entailing a long journey. Many citizens of far greater wealth did nothing of the kind for their children. But this same father did not care what character before you I was developing, or how chaste I was, so long as I possessed a cultured tongue. Though my culture really meant a desert uncultivated by you, God. You are the one true and good Lord of your land, which is my heart. In my 16th year, idleness interposed because of my family's lack of funds. I was on holiday from all schooling and lived with my parents. The thorns of lust rose above my head, and there was no hand to root them out. Indeed, when at the bathhouse my father saw that I was showing signs of virility and the stirrings of adolescence, He was overjoyed to suppose that he would now be having grandchildren, and told my mother so. His delight was that of the intoxication which makes the world oblivious of you, its creator, and to love your creation instead of you. He was drunk with the invisible wine of his perverse will directed downwards to inferior things. But in my mother's heart, you'd already begun your temple and the beginning of your holy habituation. My father was still a catechumen and had become that only recently. So she shook with a pious trepidation and a holy fear. For although I had not yet become a baptized believer, she feared the twisted paths along which walk those who turn their backs and not their faces towards you. Wretch that I am, do I dare to say that you, my God, were silent, when in reality I was traveling farther from you? Was it in the sense that you kept silence to me? Then whose words were they but yours, which you were chanting in my ears by my mother, your faithful servant? But nothing of that went down into my heart to issue in action. Her concern, and in the secret of my conscience, I recall the memory of her admonition delivered with vehement anxiety, was that I should not fall into fornication, above all, that I should not commit adultery with someone else's wife. These warnings seemed to be womanish advice, which I would have blushed to take the least notice of. But they were your warnings, and I did not realize it. I believed you were silent, and that it was only she who was speaking, when you were speaking to me through her. In her, you were scorned by me, her son, the son of your handmaid, your servant. But I did not realize this, and went on my way headlong with such blindness that among my peer group, I was ashamed not to be equally guilty of shameful behavior when I heard them boasting of their sexual exploits. Their pride was the more aggressive, the more debauched their acts were. They derived pleasure not merely from the lust of the act, but from the admiration it evoked. What is more worthy of censure than vice? Yet I went deeper into vice to avoid being despised. And when there was no act by admitting to which I could rival my depraved companions, I used to pretend I had done things I had not done at all, so that my innocence should not lead my companions to scorn my lack of courage, and lest my chastity be taken as a mark of inferiority. Such were the companions with whom I made my way through the streets of Babylon. With them I rolled in its dung as if rolling in spices and precious ointments. To tie me down the more tenaciously to Babylon's belly, the invisible enemy trampled on me and seduced me because I was in the mood to be seduced. The mother of my flesh already had fled from the center of Babylon, still lingered in the outskirts of the city. Although she'd warned me to guard my virginity, she did not seriously pay heed to what her husband had told her about me, and which she felt to hold danger for the future, for she did not seek to restrain my sexual drive within the limit of the marriage bond, if it could not be cut back to the quick. The reason why she showed no such concern was that she was afraid that the hope she placed in me would be impeded by a wife. This was not the hope which my mother placed in you for the life to come, but the hope which my parents entertained for my career, that I might do well out of the study of literature. Both of them, as I realized, were very ambitious for me. My father, because he hardly gave a thought to you at all, and his ambitions for me were concerned with mere vanities. And my mother, because she thought it would do no harm and would be a help to set me on the way towards you if I studied the traditional pattern of a literary education. That at least is my conjecture as I try to recall the characters of my parents. The reins were relaxed to allow me to amuse myself. There was no strict discipline to keep me in check, which led to an unbridled dissoluteness in many different directions. In all of this, there was a thick mist shutting me off from the brightness of your face, my God, and my iniquity, as it were, burst out from my fatness. Theft receives certain punishments by your law, Lord, and by the law written in the hearts of men, which not even iniquity itself destroys. For what thief can with equanimity endure being robbed by another thief? He cannot tolerate it, even if he is rich and the other is destitute. I wanted to carry out an act of theft and did so, driven by no kind of need other than my inner lack of any sense of or feeling for justice. Wickedness filled me. I stole something which I had in plenty and of much better quality. My desire was to enjoy not what I sought by stealing, but merely the excitement of thieving and the doing of what was wrong. There was a pear tree near our vineyard laden with fruit, though attractive in neither color nor taste. To shake the fruit off the tree and carry off the pears, I and a gang of naughty adolescents set off late at night after, in our usual pestilential way, we had continued our games in the streets. We carried off a huge load of pears, but they were not for our feasts, but merely to throw to the pigs. Even if we ate a few, nevertheless, our pleasure lay in doing what was not allowed. Such was my heart, O God, such was my heart. You had pity on it when it was at the bottom of the abyss. Now let my heart tell you what it was seeking there, and that I became evil for no reason. No motive for my wickedness except wickedness itself. It was foul, and I loved it. I loved the self-destruction. I loved my fall. Not the object for which I'd fallen, but my fall itself. My depraved soul leaped down from your firmament to ruin. I was seeking not to gain anything by shameful means, but shame for its own sake. There's beauty in lovely physical objects, as in gold and silver and all such other things. When the body touches such things, much significance attaches to the rapport of the object with the touch. Each of the other senses has its own appropriate mode of response to physical things. Temporal honor and the power of giving orders and of being in command have their own kind of dignity, though this is also the origin of the urge to self-assertion. Yet, in the acquisition of all these sources of social status, one must not depart from you, Lord, nor deviate from your law. The life which we live in this world has its attractiveness because of a certain measure of its beauty and its harmony with all these inferior objects that are beautiful. Human friendship is also a nest of love and gentleness because of the unity it brings about between many souls. Yet sin is committed for the sake of all these things, and others of this kind when, in consequence of an immoderate urge toward those things, which are at the bottom end of the scale of good, we abandon the higher and supreme goods, that is you, Lord God, and your truth and your law. These inferior goods have their delights, but not comparable to my God, who's made them all. It is in him that the just person takes delight. He is the joy of those who are true of heart. When a crime is under investigation to discover the motive for which it was done, the accusation is not usually believed except in cases where the appetite to obtain or the fear of losing one of those goods which we have called inferior appears a plausible possibility. They're beautiful and attractive, even if in comparison with the higher goods which give true happiness, they are mean and base. A man committed murder. Why? Because he loved another's wife or his property, or he wanted to acquire money to live on by plundering his goods, or he was afraid of losing his own property by the action of his victim, or he had suffered injury and burned with desire for revenge. No one would commit murder without a motive merely because he took pleasure in killing. Who would believe that? It was said of one brutal and cruel man, Catiline, that he was evil and savage without reason. Yet the preceding passage gave the motive, lest disguise might make his hand or mind slow to react. Why did he wish for that? Why so? His objective was to capture the city by violent crimes to obtain honors, government, and wealth, to live without fear of the laws and without the difficulty of attaining his ambitions because of the poverty of his family estate and his known criminal record. No, not even Catiline himself loved his crimes. Something else motivated him to commit them. Wretch that I was, what did I love in you? My act of theft, that crime which I did at night in the 16th year of my life. There was nothing beautiful about you, my thieving. Indeed, you exist at all for me to be addressing you. The fruit which we stole was beautiful, which it was because it was your creation. Most beautiful of all beings, maker of all things, the good God, God the highest good, and my true good. The fruit was beautiful, but was not that which my miserable soul coveted. I had quantity of better pears, but those I picked solely with the motive of stealing. I threw away what I had picked. My feasting was only on the wickedness which I took pleasure in enjoying. If any of those pears entered my mouth, my criminality was the piquant sauce. And now, Lord my God, I inquire what was the nature of my pleasure in the theft. The act has nothing lovely about it, none of the loveliness found in equity and prudence, or in the human mind, whether in the memory or in the senses or in physical vitality. Nor was it beautiful in the way the stars are, noble in their courses, or earth and sea, full of newborn creatures, which, as they are born, take the place of those who die, those which die. Not even in the way that specious vices have a flawed reflection of beauty. Pride imitates what is lofty, but you alone are God most high. Above all things, what does ambition seek but honor and glory? Yet you alone are worthy of honor and glorious for eternity. The cruelty of powerful people aims to arouse fear. Who is to be feared but God alone? What can be seized or stolen from his power? When or where or how or by whom? Soft endearments are intended to arouse love. But there are no caresses tenderer than your charity. No object of love is more healthy than your truth, beautiful and luminous beyond all things. Curiosity appears to be a zeal for knowledge, yet you supremely know all. Ignorance and stupidity are given the names of simplicity and innocence. But there is no greater simplicity than in you. And what greater innocence than yours? For as to evil men, their own works are damaging. Idleness appears as desire for a quiet life, yet can rest be assured apart from the Lord. Luxury wants to be called abundance and satiety, but you are fullness and the inexhaustible treasure of incorruptible pleasure. Prodigality presents itself under the shadow of generosity, but you are the rich bestower of all good things. Avarice wishes to have larger possessions, and you possess everything. Envy contends about excellence, but what is more excellent than you? Anger seeks revenge. Who avenge with greater justice than you? Fear quails before sudden and unexpected events attacking things which are loved, and takes precaution for their safety. To you, is anything unexpected or sudden? Or who can take away from you what you love? There is no reliable security except with you. Regret wastes away for the loss of things which cupidity delighted in. Its wish would be that nothing be taken away, just as nothing can be taken from you. So the soul fornicates when it turned away from you and seeks outside you the pure and clear intentions which are not to be found except by returning to you. In their perverted way, all humanity imitates you. Yet they put themselves at a distance from you and exalt themselves against you. But even by thus imitating you, they acknowledge that you are the creator of all nature, and so concede that there is no place where one can entirely escape from you. Therefore, in that act of theft, what was the object of my love, and in what way did I viciously and perversely imitate my Lord? Was my pleasure to break your law, but by deceit, since I had not the power to do that by force? Was I acting like a prisoner with restricted liberty who does without punishment what is not permitted, thereby making an assertion of possessing a dim resemblance to omnipotence? Here is a runaway slave fleeing his master and pursuing a shadow. What rottenness! What a monstrous life, and what an abyss of death! Was it possible to take pleasure in what was illicit for no reason other than it was not allowed? What shall I render to the Lord, who recalls these things to my memory, but my soul feels no fear from the recollection? I will love you, Lord, and I will give thanks and confession to your name, because you have forgiven me such great evil in my nefarious deeds. I attribute to your grace and mercy that you have melted my sins away like ice. I also attribute to your grace whatever evil acts I have not done. What could I not have done when I love gratuitous crime? I confess that everything has been forgiven, both the evil things I did of my own accord and those which I did not do because of your guidance. No one who considers his frailty would dare to attribute to his own strength, his chastity, and innocence, so that he has less cause to love you, as if he had less need of your mercy, by which you forgive the sins of those converted to you. If man is called by you, follows your voice, and has avoided doing those acts which I'm recalling and avowing in my own life, he should not mock the healing of a sick man by the physician, whose help has kept him from falling sick, or at least enabled him to be less gravely ill. He should love you no less, indeed, even more, for he sees that the one who delivered me from the great sickness of my sin is also he through whom he may see that he himself has not been a victim of the same great sickness. What fruit had I, wretched boy, in these things, which I now blush to recall? Above all, in that death in which I love nothing but the death itself. The death itself was a nothing, and for that reason I was the more miserable. Yet had I been alone, I would not have done it. I remember my state of mind to be thus at the time. Alone, I would never have done it. Therefore, my love in that act was to be associated with the gang in whose company I did it. Does it follow that I love something other than the theft? No, nothing else in reality, because association with the gang is also a nothing. What is it in reality? Who can teach me that? But he who illuminates my heart and disperses the shadows in it. What else has stirred my mind to ask and discuss and consider this question? If I had liked the pears, which I stole and actually desired to enjoy them, I could by myself have committed that wicked act, had it been enough to attain the pleasure which I sought. I would not have needed to inflame the itch of my cupidity through the excitement generated by sharing my guilt with others. But my pleasure was not in the pears, it was in the crime itself done in association with a single group. What was my state of mind? It is quite certain it was utterly shameful, and it disgraced me that I had it. Yet what was it? Who understands his sins? It was all done for a giggle, as if our hearts were tickled to think we were deceiving those who would not think us capable of such behavior and would have profoundly disapproved. Why then did I derive pleasure from an act I would have not done on my own. Is it that nobody can easily laugh when alone? Certainly, no one readily laughs when alone. Sometimes laughter overcomes individuals when no one is present. If their senses or their mind perceive something utterly absurd, but alone, I would not have done it. Could not conceivably have done it by myself. See, before you, my God, the living memory of my soul. Alone, I would not have committed that crime, in which my pleasure lay not in what I was stealing, but in the act of theft. But had I been alone, it would have given me absolutely no pleasure, nor would I have committed it. Friendship can be a dangerous enemy, a seduction of the mind lying beyond the reach of investigation. Out of a game and a jest came an avid desire to do injury and an appetite to inflict loss on someone else without any motive on my part of personal gain and no pleasure in settling a score. As soon as the words were spoken, let us go and do it. One is ashamed not to be shameless. Who can untie this extremely twisted and tangled knot? It's a foul affair. I have no wish to give attention to it. I have no desire to contemplate it. My desire is for you, justice and innocence. You are lovely and splendid to honest eyes. The satiety of your love is insatiable. With you is utter peace and a life immune from disturbance. The person who enters into you enters into the joy of the Lord and will not be afraid. He will find himself in the supreme good where it is not supremely good to be, or where it is supremely good to be. As an adolescent, I went astray from you, my God, far from your unmoved stability. I became to myself a region of destitution.